The night King Alaric Draven destroyed his queen wasn't done in private. It was done before the entire council, with witnesses and wolves who would carry the story across every border. He didn't just betray her, he humiliated her. Alina Vane, the Luna who had ruled at his side with grace and strength, stood frozen as her mate presented another woman, a mistress, and the infant son she carried, an heir. His excuse was surgical and brutal. Alina was barren, unfit, worthless to the bloodline. But beneath her calm expression, a secret burned. She was already pregnant. That night, she made a choice that would shatter kingdoms. If you want to see how a discarded queen becomes a legend, stay until the end. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. The Great Hall of Iron Ridge was built to hold power. Stone pillars rose like sentinels toward a vaulted ceiling lost in shadow, each one carved with the history of the pack, victories in war, treaties signed in blood, names of alphas who had ruled with iron and fire. Torches lined the walls in iron sconces, their flames casting long, wavering shadows across the polished slate floor. Banners hung between the pillars, deep green with silver wolves embroidered in thread that caught the firelight. At the center of it all sat the throne, carved from a single piece of black stone, ancient and unyielding. Beside it stood a smaller seat, simpler but no less significant, the Luna's chair. Alina Vane had occupied that seat for 6 years. She had learned to sit still under scrutiny, to meet the eyes of men who thought themselves her betters, to smile when the council whispered behind their hands. She had learned to carry herself with the kind of dignity that made even the harshest critics fall silent, at least to her face. She was not born into royalty. Her family had been mid-rank, respected but unremarkable, known more for their loyalty than their influence. But when Alaric Draven claimed her as his mate, she had risen. She had earned her place through patience, through strength, through proving herself worthy of standing beside a king, or so she had believed. Tonight the hall was packed. Council members filled the rows of wooden benches, their faces sharp and watchful in the torchlight. Visiting alphas from allied packs stood along the edges of the room, arms crossed, eyes gleaming with curiosity. Servants moved quietly along the walls, refilling goblets, stoking fires, their heads bowed. The air was thick with expectation, a tension that made the space feel smaller than it was. Alina sat in her chair, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk, the color of the Iron Ridge banner, with silver embroidery along the sleeves and neckline. Her dark hair was pinned back in an intricate braid, a few loose strands framing her face. Around her throat, a thin silver chain held a pendant, a wolf's head, the symbol of her position. She looked every bit the queen they expected, but something was wrong. She had felt it the moment she entered the hall, the way conversation stopped when she passed, the way eyes followed her but wouldn't meet her gaze, the way even Margot, her lady-in-waiting, had avoided looking at her when helping her dress. Alaric had summoned her here without explanation. His message had been delivered by a guard, not a servant, terse and formal. The king requests your presence in the Great Hall at sunset, council business. She had assumed it was another political matter. A treaty, perhaps. News from the border skirmishes in the east where rogue packs had been testing their defenses. Maybe an announcement about trade routes or alliances. She was wrong. Alaric stood at the center of the hall, his back to her. He was a broad-shouldered man, tall and commanding, with dark hair that fell just past his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore black leather and steel, the armor of a warrior king, though there was no battle tonight. He had always looked like someone born to rule, spine straight, jaw set, every movement deliberate. When he turned to face her, his expression was unreadable. "Alina," he said, his voice carrying across the hall with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to being heard. "Come forward." She rose from her seat, her movements smooth and measured. Every eye in the room turned toward her. She was used to it, the scrutiny, the judgment, the weight of expectation. She walked toward him, her footsteps echoing on the stone floor. The silence was absolute. When she stopped a few feet from him, she inclined her head. "My king," she said quietly, "you summoned me." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked past her toward the far door, his jaw tightened. "Bring her in." Alina's breath caught. The murmur that rippled through the hall was low but unmistakable. She turned, following his gaze. The door opened. A woman stepped through. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, with pale skin that seemed almost luminous in the torchlight and auburn hair that tumbled over her shoulders in soft, artless waves. She wore a simple dress, cream-colored linen with no adornment, no jewelry, nothing to mark her as anyone of significance. But it was her expression that struck Alina first. Not defiance, not guilt, just calm. A quiet, resigned calm, as if she had been prepared for this moment. In her arms she carried a child, an infant no more than a few months old, wrapped in white linen. The baby's eyes were closed, his tiny fists curled against the woman's chest. His face was peaceful, unaware. His hair was dark, a soft downy fuzz the color of charcoal, like Alaric's. Alina's world tilted. She looked at the woman, at the child, at Alaric. Her heart was hammering, but her face remained still. She had learned that, at least, how to hide what she felt. "What is this?" Her voice was steady, but it cost her. Alaric stepped forward, closing the distance between them. His gaze was fixed on her, unblinking. "This is Seraphine," he said, "and this is my son." The words hit like a blade between her ribs. Alina stared at him. Her mind was racing, trying to process what he had just said, trying to find some other explanation, some mistake, but there was none. The truth was standing in front of her, wrapped in white linen, sleeping peacefully in another woman's arms. "Your son," she repeated slowly. "Yes." Alaric's tone was flat, matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing grain shipments or troop movements. "His name is Cassian. He was born 3 months ago." 3 months. Alina's hands trembled. She clasped them together in front of her, forcing herself to stay upright. She could feel the eyes on her, dozens of them, watching, waiting for her reaction. "And you kept this from me." "I did what was necessary." Alaric's eyes didn't waver. "You know as well as I do that this pack needs an heir. We've been mated for 6 years, Alina. 6 years, and you've given me nothing." The words were a slap. She felt the heat rise in her face, the sting of humiliation spreading through her chest like poison. Around them, the hall was silent. No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. They were all watching her, council members, alphas, servants, waiting to see if she would break. "Nothing?" she whispered. "No children," Alaric said coldly. "No bloodline. The council has been patient, but patience has limits. I am a king, Alina. I need a legacy. This pack needs continuity, stability, and you could not provide it." Alina's vision blurred at the edges. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him that she had tried, that she had endured every test, every healer, every whispered accusation behind closed doors, that she had borne the shame in silence, had carried the weight of their expectations, had blamed herself for 6 years because she loved him, because she believed in what they had built together. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she looked at the woman, Seraphine, who stood quietly near the door, her eyes downcast. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't smug. She looked tired, hollow even, like a piece moved on a board by hands not her own. "You took a mistress," Alina said, her voice breaking despite her best efforts. "You betrayed me." "I secured the future of this pack," Alaric corrected sharply. "Seraphine has given me what you could not. And now the council will recognize Cassian as my rightful heir." A murmur rippled through the hall. Some of the council members nodded. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But no one spoke against him. No one challenged the declaration. Alina's chest tightened. She could feel it, the bond between them. The mate bond, forged the night he claimed her 6 years ago in front of this very hall. It should have broken. It should have shattered the moment he touched another woman, the moment he laid with her, the moment he chose someone else. But it hadn't. It was still there, alive and aching, a constant pull in her chest, like a chain wrapped around her heart. "Why?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why bring me here? Why do this in front of them? Why humiliate me?" Alaric's jaw clenched. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or discomfort, but it was gone before she could name it. "Because you are still my Luna," he said, "and you will remain so. The bond has not broken, Alina. That means something. It means you still have a place here. It means you want to keep me in a cage," she said, her voice sharper now. "You want your heir and your queen. You want the legitimacy I give you. You want everything. I want what is best for Iron Ridge. You want control. His expression hardened. You're upset. I understand that. But this isn't about you or me. This is about the pack, about our people. They need to see strength, unity, a clear line of succession. They need to see you parading your mistress and bastard son while your mate stands silent. The words came out harsher than she intended, but she didn't care anymore. Alaric's eyes flashed. Watch yourself. Or what? Alina stepped closer, her voice low and dangerous. You'll humiliate me further? You've already done that. You've made me a spectacle. What more can you take from me? I can take your title, he said coldly. I can strip you of everything. Don't test me, Alina. She laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the silent hall. My title? You think I care about a title? You think that's what I'm mourning? Then what? Alaric demanded. You, she said quietly. I'm mourning you, the man I thought you were. For a moment, he said nothing. The hall was so quiet she could hear the crackling of the torches, the distant sound of wind outside the stone walls. Then Alaric's expression went cold. You will accept this, he said. You will stand beside me as you always have. The pack will see unity, strength. That is what we owe them. That is your duty. Alina looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. She saw ambition, pride, a man who believed his own justifications, who had convinced himself that cruelty could be duty, that betrayal could be necessity. No, she said. The hall went silent. Alaric frowned. What did you say? I said no. Alina's voice was quiet, but it carried through the hall like a bell. I won't stand beside you while you parade your mistress and your son. I won't smile and pretend this didn't break me. I won't be your puppet, Alaric. I won't be your prop. His expression darkened. You don't have a choice. There is always a choice. She turned and walked toward the door. Behind her, Alaric's voice rose, sharp with command. Alina, stop. She didn't. Alina. The bond flared, sharp, vicious, like claws sinking into her chest. She stumbled, her hand shooting out to brace against a pillar. Pain lanced through her ribs, her head. The bond didn't want her to leave. It was pulling at her, screaming at her to turn around, to go back, to submit. But she kept walking. She pushed through the door and into the corridor beyond, her breath coming in gasps. Behind her, she heard Alaric shout something, an order maybe, but the words were lost in the roaring in her ears. The bond was a living thing now, clawing at her, trying to drag her back. She pressed her hand to the wall and forced herself forward. Her chambers were on the opposite side of the castle, up 2 flights of stairs and down a long hallway lined with tapestries. She made it halfway there before the nausea hit. She doubled over, one hand braced against the cold stone wall, the other clutching her stomach. The bond was screaming now, a relentless pull that made her vision swim. Her knees buckled. She sank to the floor gasping, but beneath the pain she felt something else, a flutter, soft, fragile, alive. Her hand moved to her abdomen, pressing gently through the fabric of her gown. She had known for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of secret certainty, of mornings spent retching into a basin while Margot stood outside the door pretending not to notice. 3 weeks of waiting for the right moment to tell him. Now, the secret felt like a weapon. She straightened, using the wall to pull herself upright. Her legs shook, but she forced them to move. 1 step, then another. She had to leave. Alina's chambers were dark when she arrived. The fire had burned low, leaving only embers glowing in the hearth. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her whole body shaking. For 6 years, this room had been her sanctuary. The bed with its heavy green curtains. The wardrobe filled with gowns she'd worn to councils and ceremonies. The vanity where she'd prepared herself each morning, painting on the face of a queen. The window overlooking the eastern forest, where she'd watched the sunrise and convinced herself that she belonged here. It had all been a lie. She moved quickly, pulling a leather satchel from beneath the bed. Her hands were steadier now, purpose overriding panic. She packed light, a woolen cloak, dark and hooded, a change of clothes, sturdy travel wear she'd kept from before her mating, a small pouch of coin she'd saved over the years, money from her family's estate that Alaric had never bothered to claim, a knife, slim and sharp, that her brother had given her when she was 16. She left the gowns, the jewelry, the crown. They were symbols of a life she no longer wanted. As she worked, her mind churned. Alaric would send hunters. He wouldn't let her go, not because he loved her, but because he couldn't afford to. A queen fleeing her king was a scandal, a sign of weakness. The other packs would see it as instability, and predators always circled weakness. He would spin a story, claim she was unwell, unstable, grief-stricken. He would bring her back and lock her away, strip her of any remaining autonomy, unless she disappeared completely. The Frostwild. The name came to her unbidden, a whisper from stories she'd heard as a child. It was a brutal stretch of wilderness far to the north, beyond the reach of any pack's territory. A place of ice and stone where the wind could strip flesh from bone and the cold killed faster than any predator. Even seasoned warriors avoided it. Those who ventured into the Frostwild rarely came back, which meant no one would expect her to go there. She slung the satchel over her shoulder and paused at the window. The moon was full tonight, bright enough to cast shadows. Below, the courtyard was empty, the guards stationed at the main gates. She could slip out through the servants' corridor, past the kitchens, and into the forest before anyone noticed. She took one last look at the room, at the bed where she had slept beside Alaric, where she had believed in a future that would never come. At the vanity where she had prepared herself to be something she wasn't, at the life she had built and lost. Then she turned away. The servants' corridor was narrow and dim, lit only by a few sputtering candles. Alina moved quickly, her boots silent on the stone floor. She passed the kitchens, where she could hear voices, cooks preparing tomorrow's meals, unaware of the chaos in the great hall. She slipped past them, out through a side door that led to the laundry yard. The night air hit her like a shock, cold, sharp. It smelled of pine and frost. She pulled the hood of her cloak up and started walking. The forest was dark, the trees towering overhead like silent sentinels. Alina moved through them with practiced ease. She had explored these woods when she first came to Iron Ridge, before the weight of her position had confined her to the castle. She knew the paths, the streams, the places where the underbrush grew thick enough to hide a trail. The bond pulled at her with every step, a constant ache in her chest. It whispered to her, soft and insidious, urging her to return, to go back, to submit. She gritted her teeth and pushed forward. By the time the first gray light of dawn touched the sky, she had reached the edge of Iron Ridge territory. The trees thinned here, giving way to rolling hills covered in frost. In the distance, she could see the mountains, jagged peaks that pierced the sky, their tops lost in cloud. The Frostwild. She didn't stop. Behind her, carried on the wind, she heard the howl. It was distant but unmistakable. A hunter's call. Alina's heart lurched. She broke into a run. The ground was uneven, rocky, and treacherous. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her legs burning. The bond flared again, sharper this time, and she gasped, stumbling. Her hand went instinctively to her stomach, protective. She couldn't afford to fall. Not now. She pushed herself harder, ignoring the pain, the exhaustion. The howls grew closer, more of them now, a chorus rising in the pre-dawn light. And then, ahead of her, the ground dropped away. She skidded to a stop at the edge of a cliff, loose stones tumbling over the side. Below, a river churned through a narrow gorge, the water black and violent, crashing over rocks with a sound like thunder. There was no way down, no bridge, no crossing. The howls were right behind her now. Alina turned. 3 wolves emerged from the tree line, massive and snarling, their eyes glowing amber in the dim light. Their fur bristled, their teeth bared. Behind them, a man stepped forward, tall and lean, with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. She recognized him. Davrin, one of Alaric's enforcers. "Luna," he said, his voice mocking as he shifted back to human form, unconcerned with his nakedness in the cold. "The king wants you back." Alina's jaw tightened, her hand moved to the knife at her belt. "Tell the king," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat, "that I am not his anymore." Davrin laughed, a harsh sound. "You don't get to decide that. The bond says otherwise. You're his mate, his property, and you're coming back." "I'm not property." "Tell that to the council." He gestured to the wolves beside him. "Now, you can come willingly, or we drag you. Your choice." Alina looked at him, at the wolves, at the river below, and she jumped. The fall was brief and terrible. The wind screamed past her ears, her stomach lurched, she hit the water like a stone. The cold was instant and absolute, driving the air from her lungs. The current grabbed her immediately, dragging her under, spinning her. She couldn't tell which way was up. Her lungs burned. Her vision darkened. Then her head broke the surface. She gasped, choking on water and air. Her arms flailed, trying to find purchase, but there was nothing. The river carried her, battering her against rocks, pulling her under again and again. She thought of the child inside her. She thought of surviving, and she fought. Her hand caught a branch, part of a fallen tree jutting from the bank. She held on with everything she had, her fingers numb, her body screaming. Slowly, agonizingly, she pulled herself toward the shore. When she finally dragged herself onto solid ground, she lay there, shaking, coughing up water. Above, on the cliff, she could hear Davrin shouting orders, but the river had carried her far. Too far for them to follow easily. She forced herself to stand, and she kept moving north, toward the Frostwild, toward the unknown, toward freedom. The cold was worse than anything Alina had imagined. She had been walking for 2 days, or maybe 3, she'd lost count, through terrain that seemed designed to kill. The forest had thinned within hours of her escape from the river, giving way to rocky foothills where nothing grew but scrub brush and twisted skeletal trees that clawed at the gray sky. The ground was hard as iron beneath a layer of frost that crunched under her boots with every step. Her cloak was still damp from the river, frozen stiff in places, and it chafed against her neck with every movement. Her body was a catalog of pain. Her ribs ached from where she'd slammed into rocks in the current. Her hands were raw and blistered, the skin split open in places from clutching at stones and branches while the water tried to drag her under. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, threatening to give out with each step. The cut on her shoulder from her fall had stopped bleeding, but it throbbed with every breath. But she kept moving, because stopping meant dying. The landscape had changed as she climbed higher into the mountains. The scrub brush disappeared entirely, replaced by bare rock and ice. The wind howled constantly here, a living thing that clawed at her face and stole what little warmth remained in her body. Snow had started falling the previous night, not the soft, gentle snow of Iron Ridge winters, but hard pellets of ice that stung like needles and accumulated in drifts that made every step uncertain. She had no tent, no bedroll. She'd slept, if it could be called that, huddled in the lee of a boulder, shivering so violently her teeth rattled and her jaw ached. When dawn came, gray and cheerless, she'd forced herself to stand and keep moving. Her fingers were numb. She couldn't feel her toes anymore. The bond was quieter now. Distance had weakened it, or maybe it was her own exhaustion drowning it out. She could still feel it, a dull ache in her chest like a bruise that wouldn't heal, but the screaming pull had faded to a whisper. Small mercies. She wondered if Alaric felt it too, this fraying connection. She wondered if it hurt him the way it hurt her. She hoped it did. Her hand went to her stomach, a gesture that was becoming habitual. She couldn't feel anything yet. It was too early, but knowing the child was there gave her something to hold on to, a reason beyond spite and survival. This baby was proof that Alaric had been wrong, that his entire justification for betrayal had been built on nothing. That thought kept her warm when nothing else could. She crested a ridge and stopped, her breath catching. Below her, the land fell away into a valley, if it could be called that. It was more like a wound carved into the earth, steep-sided and barren, the walls striped with layers of dark stone. At the bottom, barely visible through the falling snow, she could see structures, buildings, a settlement. Alina's heart leaped. Shelter, food, maybe even a fire. She started down the slope, her boots sliding on loose scree. The descent was treacherous. Halfway down, her foot caught on something buried in the snow and she fell hard, tumbling several feet before catching herself against a jutting rock. Pain shot through her shoulder, the same one she'd injured before. She lay there for a moment, breathing hard, tasting blood where she'd bitten her tongue. She wanted to stay down. Every part of her screamed to just lie there and let the cold take her. Instead, she pushed herself up. Blood seeped through a new tear in her cloak where she'd scraped against rock. She ignored it and kept going, half sliding, half climbing down the slope. By the time she reached the valley floor, the light was fading. The structures resolved themselves into a dozen rough buildings clustered together, cabins built from logs and stone, their roofs weighted down with rocks against the wind. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, a sight so beautiful it almost made her weep. Signs of life, of warmth, of people who had survived in this impossible place. She approached slowly, wary. This far north, beyond the reach of any established pack, she had no idea what kind of people lived here. Outcasts, maybe. Rogues, criminals, or something worse. The first person she saw was a woman carrying firewood, her face weathered and hard as the rocks around them. Deep lines bracketed her mouth. Her hands were scarred. The woman stopped when she spotted Alina, her eyes narrowing. "Lost?" the woman asked, her voice rough from years of cold wind. "I need shelter," Alina said. Her voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Just for a night. I can pay." The woman looked her up and down, taking in the torn cloak, the exhaustion, the way Alina swayed on her feet like a tree about to fall. "You're a long way from anywhere." "I know." "Running from something?" Alina hesitated. Lying seemed pointless. "Yes," the woman grunted. "Aren't we all?" She jerked her head toward one of the larger buildings. "Hall's that way. Talk to Garrett. He decides who stays and who freezes." "Thank you." The woman was already walking away, her boots crunching in the snow. The hall was warmer than outside, but not by much. A fire burned in a stone hearth at one end, and rough tables filled the space. A dozen people sat scattered around, eating from wooden bowls. They all looked up when Alina entered, their conversations dying mid-sentence. She felt their eyes on her, assessing, calculating, wondering what her arrival meant for them. She kept her chin up and walked toward the fire, each step an act of will. A man stood near the hearth, tall, broad-shouldered, with gray streaking his dark hair and scars crisscrossing his forearms. He watched her approach with an expression that gave nothing away, his face weathered and hard. "You're Garrett?" she asked. "I am." His voice was deep, measured. "And you're either stupid or desperate to be this far north." "Desperate," she admitted. "Most are." He crossed his arms, studying her. "What do you want?" "Shelter, food. I'll work for it." "Work doing what?" "You look like you can barely stand." "I'll do whatever needs doing," she said. "I'm stronger than I look." Garrett's eyes moved over her, not lecherously, but clinically, like a farmer evaluating livestock at market. "Your pack," he said finally. "I can smell it on you, which means you're either exiled or running." Alina's jaw tightened. "Does it matter?" "It does if you brought trouble with you." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Hunters don't usually stop at territorial borders, and if you're important enough to run from, you're important enough to chase." She met his gaze steadily. "I didn't bring trouble." "You sure about that?" "I'll be gone in a few days. I just need to recover." Garrett studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he sighed. 3 days? You work, you eat, you sleep in the back room with the others. You cause problems, you're out in the snow. Understood?" "Understood." "Good." He turned toward the fire. "Mari, get her some food." A young woman with short-cropped hair and quick, suspicious eyes appeared, handing Alina a bowl of something that steamed. Alina took it gratefully and found a seat at the end of one of the tables, as far from the others as she could manage. The stew was thin, mostly broth with a few chunks of meat and root vegetables, but it was hot and she was starving. She ate slowly, trying to make it last, trying not to draw more attention than she already had, but she could feel the others watching her between bites of their own food. "Where you from?" a man asked from across the table. He was younger, maybe mid-20s, with a crooked nose that had been broken at least twice and suspicious eyes. "South," Alina said vaguely. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting." He snorted but didn't press. Someone else muttered something she couldn't quite hear, and a few people laughed. She ignored them and finished her stew. The back room turned out to be a storage area with a few bedrolls laid out on the floor between crates and barrels. Alina claimed one in the corner, away from the others. She lay down fully clothed, her satchel clutched to her chest, and closed her eyes. Sleep came hard and fast, dragging her under like the river had. She dreamed of water, of drowning, of Alaric's face above her, watching her sink, doing nothing to save her. She woke to shouting. Alina sat up, disoriented, her heart pounding. Around her, the others were scrambling to their feet, pulling on boots, grabbing weapons, knives, clubs, anything they could reach. Outside, she could hear voices raised in alarm, the sound of running feet. She grabbed her knife and followed them out into the pre-dawn gray. The settlement was in chaos. People were running toward the eastern edge, where the valley opened onto a narrow pass. Garrett stood in the center of it all, barking orders, his voice cutting through the confusion. "What's happening?" Alina asked the woman beside her, the one who'd given her food. "Raiders," the woman said grimly, tightening her grip on a rusty sword. "They hit us every few weeks. Take what they can. Kill anyone who fights back." Alina's stomach twisted. "How many?" "Too many." She followed the crowd toward the pass and saw them, a group of maybe 20 men on foot, armed with axes and crude spears. They moved with the confidence of people who'd done this before, who knew the settlement couldn't mount a real defense. Some wore furs. Others were bare-chested despite the cold, their skin covered in scars and crude tattoos. Garrett was organizing a defense such as it was. A dozen people with whatever weapons they could find, kitchen knives, old swords, a few bows with arrows that looked homemade. It wasn't enough. Not even close. "Get back inside," Garrett snapped when he saw Alina. "This isn't your fight. I can help." "You can barely walk." "I can fight." He looked at her, his expression torn between annoyance and desperation. Then he thrust a short sword into her hands. The blade was old, nicked, but sharp enough. "Stay behind the line. Don't do anything stupid." "I'll try." The raiders hit like a wave. They came screaming, wild and undisciplined, but brutal. The first clash was chaos, metal on metal, shouts and screams, the wet sound of blades finding flesh. Alina found herself next to a man who went down immediately, a raider's axe buried in his shoulder. Blood sprayed across the snow. She swung her sword instinctively, catching the raider across the arm. He roared and backhanded her, sending her sprawling into the snow. Her vision swam. Her ears rang. She hit the ground hard, tasting blood. The raider loomed over her, raising his axe for a killing blow. Then Garrett was there, his blade taking the raider in the throat. The man collapsed, blood spraying, gurgling. "Get up!" Garrett shouted. Alina scrambled to her feet, her hands shaking. The fight was going poorly. The settlers were outnumbered and outmatched. Bodies littered the ground. Some raiders, more settlers. Garrett was holding the center, his sword moving in brutal, efficient arcs, but the line was collapsing on both flanks. Alina saw a raider break through, heading for the hall where the elderly and children had taken shelter. She didn't think. She ran. She caught him from behind, driving her knife into his side. He turned, snarling, and grabbed her by the throat. His fingers squeezed. She couldn't breathe. They went down together, grappling in the snow. He was stronger, heavier, but she was desperate. Her hand found a rock and she smashed it into his temple once, twice, 3 times until he stopped moving and his grip went slack. She rolled off him, gasping, her throat aching. When she looked up, it was over. The raiders were retreating, dragging their wounded with them, leaving their dead behind. The settlers stood among the bodies, bloodied and exhausted, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. Garrett was alive, though bleeding from a cut above his eye. He looked at Alina, then at the dead raider at her feet. The man's skull caved in on one side. "I thought I told you to stay behind the line," he said. "I didn't listen." He almost smiled. "Almost. I noticed." They burned the dead that afternoon, both settlers and raiders. It was practical, Garrett explained. The ground was too frozen to dig graves, and leaving bodies attracted wolves. Alina watched the pyres burn, her hands still shaking. That night, Garrett found her sitting outside the hall, staring at her hands. They were covered in dried blood. She'd washed them 3 times, but she could still see it in the creases of her palms, under her fingernails. "First kill?" he asked, sitting down beside her. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "It doesn't get easier," he said quietly. "Anyone who tells you it does is lying." "I don't regret it," she said finally. "He was going to hurt someone. That's what you hold on to." Garrett was quiet for a moment, staring at the smoke rising from the pyres. "You fought well, better than I expected from someone half dead." "I was trained," she said before she could think better of it. "By who?" She hesitated. "My pack. Before I left." Garrett nodded slowly, his eyes sharp. "You're no ordinary runaway." She didn't answer. I won't ask, he said after a moment. Everyone here has a past they'd rather forget. But you should know, trouble finds people like you. You might want to keep moving before yours catches up. I know. He stood, wincing, his hand going to his ribs. You can stay longer if you need. You've earned it. Anyone who fights like that has a place here, if they want it. Thank you. But she knew she couldn't stay. Not really. 3 days turned into a week. Alina worked, hauling water from the half-frozen stream, chopping wood until her hands blistered again, helping patch the holes the raiders had torn in the settlement's defenses. The work was brutal, but it felt good, purposeful. It kept her mind occupied and her body warm. The settlement needed hands desperately, and she needed time to heal. Her body was recovering, slowly. The cuts scabbed over. The bruises faded to yellow and green. She could breathe without her ribs screaming. The people stopped watching her with quite so much suspicion. A few even nodded when she passed. Mari, the woman who'd given her food that first night, started sitting with her at meals. You're not what I expected, Mari said one evening. What did you expect? Someone softer, weaker. Most people who stumble in here from the south don't last a day. I'm not most people, Mari laughed. I noticed. But Alina knew she was living on borrowed time. On the 8th day, a scout came running into the settlement, breathless and wild-eyed. Wolves, he gasped, doubled over, hands on his knees. Coming from the south, a hunting party, moving fast. Alina's blood went cold. Her hand went instinctively to the knife at her belt. Garrett looked at her, his expression grim. Yours? She nodded. How many? I don't know, but they won't stop. Not until they find me, or I'm dead. Garrett swore, a long string of profanity that made even the hardened settlers wince. We can't fight a pack, not after the raiders. We lost 6 people. We don't have the numbers. I know. Alina stood, her decision already made. I'll leave. Now. Before they get here. They're looking for me, not you. If I'm gone, they might pass through. And go where? Garrett demanded. She looked north, toward the mountains that loomed in the distance, their peaks lost in perpetual cloud. Deeper, into the Frostwild. That's suicide, Mari said, her eyes wide. Nobody survives the deep Frostwild. That's where the old stories come from, the ones about things that aren't wolves or men. So is staying, Alina said quietly. Garrett stared at her for a long moment, then sighed heavily. There's an old trapper's route. Follows the ridgeline north about 2 days from here, if the weather holds. If you can make it that far, you might lose them in the peaks. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You'll probably die out there. She managed a grim smile. I've heard that before. She left within the hour, her satchel repacked with what little food the settlement could spare. Dried meat, hard bread, a small flask of something that burned going down. Mari gave her an extra blanket, worn but thick. Garrett handed her a better knife. If you survive, he said, don't come back this way. Next time we might not be so welcoming. As she walked away, following the path Garrett had described, he called after her. Hey! She turned. Whatever you're running from, he said, his voice carrying across the snow. I hope it was worth it. Alina touched her stomach briefly, a gesture so quick she wasn't sure he saw it. Then she nodded. It was The mountains swallowed her whole. The trapper's route was barely visible, more memory than path, just a faint line where the snow was slightly more packed, where someone had once walked regularly enough to leave a mark. It wound through rock fields and across narrow ledges where one wrong step meant a fatal drop into crevasses so deep she couldn't see the bottom. The wind was relentless, howling through the peaks like something alive and malicious, trying to push her off the edge. She walked for hours, her world reduced to the next step, the next breath, the next moment of not falling. Her body was failing again. She was dizzy with hunger despite the food she'd eaten. Her hands shook with cold even inside her gloves. The baby. She had to keep reminding herself the baby was there, had to believe it was still alive inside her, still holding on. On the second day, the snow came. Not flurries this time, but a full storm that turned the world white and erased all sense of direction. Visibility dropped to nothing. She could barely see her own feet. Alina pushed forward blindly, one hand trailing along the rock wall to her left for guidance, the other clutching her cloak closed against the wind that tried to tear it away. Then the wall disappeared. She stumbled, reaching out, finding nothing but air. Panic seized her. She was lost. Completely, utterly lost. No wall to follow, no path visible, no idea which direction was forward and which was a fatal drop. She sank to her knees, the fight draining out of her. This was it. This was how it ended. Not at Alaric's hand, not at the claws of his hunters, but here, alone in the frozen dark, just another corpse for the mountain to claim. She thought of the child inside her, the life that would die with her. She thought of everything she'd endured, the betrayal, the humiliation, the river, the raiders. And she screamed. The sound was swallowed by the wind, lost in the storm, meaningless. But it felt good. It felt like defiance, like refusing to go quietly. When she opened her eyes, wiping snow from her lashes, she saw light, a flicker, faint and orange, barely visible through the white curtain of the storm. Fire. She forced herself to stand, forced her frozen legs to move. The light grew stronger as she approached, resolving into the mouth of a cave, a dark opening in the rock face with warmth spilling out, impossible and perfect. She stumbled inside and stopped. A man sat beside a small fire, watching her with eyes the color of ice in winter sunlight. He was tall, lean, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders, and a face that looked carved from stone, all sharp angles and hard lines. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Please," Alina whispered, her voice barely working. "I need help." The man studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood, and she realized he was even taller than she'd thought, towering over her. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice was low, rough with disuse, like he hadn't spoken in days or weeks. "No one," she said. "Just someone trying to survive." He looked at her, really looked at her, his gaze moving from her face to her torn cloak to the way she swayed on her feet. And something in his expression shifted. "You're dying," he said flatly. "I know." He crossed the cave in 2 strides, catching her as her legs gave out. His hands were surprisingly gentle. "Then I suppose I should stop that." She looked up at him, her vision blurring at the edges. "Why would you?" His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. "Because the mountain doesn't need more corpses." And the world went dark. When Alina woke, she was warm. That was the first shock. Warmth, real warmth, seeping into her bones after so long in the cold. The second shock was that she was alive at all. She lay still for a moment, eyes closed, trying to piece together where she was. The air smelled of smoke and something cooking. She could hear the crackle of fire, the sound of wind howling outside, but muffled, distant. She opened her eyes. The cave was larger than she'd thought, the ceiling high enough that the firelight didn't reach it. The walls were rough stone, but someone had made an effort to make the space livable. Furs piled in one corner for sleeping, supplies stacked neatly along the walls, tools hanging from iron hooks driven into cracks in the rock. The fire burned in a ring of stones at the center, and over it hung a pot that bubbled gently. The man sat across the fire, watching her. Up close, in better light, he looked different than she remembered. Younger, maybe, late 30s at most, but worn in a way that had nothing to do with age. His face was angular, severe, with a scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone. His eyes were still that startling pale blue, almost colorless. He wore simple clothes, wool and leather, patched but clean. "You're awake," he said. Not a question. Alina tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain shot through her shoulder, her ribs. She gasped. "Don't move too fast." His voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "You've been out for 2 days. Your body needs time." 2 days? Her voice came out as a croak. He stood and crossed to her, crouching down with a wooden cup in his hand. "Drink." She took it. The liquid was warm, herbal, bitter. She drank it anyway. "What is this?" "Something to keep the fever down." "You were burning up when I brought you in." She looked down at herself. Someone had changed her clothes. She now wore a rough wool shirt that was far too large and clean woolen leggings. Her own clothes hung near the fire, drying. "You undressed me," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "You were soaked through." You would have died. He said it with no emotion, just stating a fact. I've seen corpses. I preferred not to have one in my cave. Alina's jaw tightened. Thank you, she said, though the word tasted strange. He nodded once and returned to his seat by the fire. She studied him in the firelight. There was something off about him, something she couldn't quite name. The way he moved, economical, precise, like every motion was calculated. The way he watched her, not with curiosity or concern, but with the detached assessment of someone observing a wounded animal. What's your name? She asked. He was silent for a long moment. Kaylin. I don't care who you are, he interrupted, or where you came from. You can stay until you're strong enough to leave. After that, you go. The bluntness of it stung, but she couldn't argue. How long will that be? A week, maybe 2. Depends on how fast you heal. And then? Then you leave and die somewhere else. He stirred the pot over the fire. The Frostwild doesn't forgive weakness. I'm not weak. He looked at her, one eyebrow raised. You collapsed in a snowstorm. You would have frozen to death 20 feet from shelter. That's weakness. I survived everything that came before, she shot back. That's strength. Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, maybe, or respect. But it was gone before she could be sure. We'll see. The days that followed were brutal. Kaylin didn't coddle her. The morning after she woke, he dragged her out of the furs at dawn and put her to work. Her body screamed in protest, every muscle aching, but he ignored her complaints. You want to survive here? He said, handing her a bucket. You work. Water doesn't haul itself. The stream was a 10-minute walk from the cave, down a treacherous slope covered in ice. Alina slipped twice on the first trip, spilling half the water. Kaylin watched her struggle back up with the half-empty bucket and said nothing, just pointed back down the slope. Again. I'm injured. Then you'll die injured. Again. She went again. By the end of the first day, her hands were raw and bleeding from where the bucket's rope had dug into her palms. Her legs trembled. Her shoulder throbbed. When she finally collapsed by the fire that night, Kaylin tossed her a piece of dried meat. Eat. You'll need your strength tomorrow. What's tomorrow? Firewood. She wanted to cry. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him she was pregnant, that she couldn't do this. But she bit her tongue and ate the meat in silence. The days blurred together. Firewood, water, hauling supplies. Kaylin worked her relentlessly, driving her past what she thought were her limits. When she stumbled, he didn't help her up. When she complained, he ignored her. When she wanted to quit, he simply said, Then quit. The mountain will take care of the rest. So she didn't quit. Slowly, painfully, her body adapted. The shaking in her legs stopped. Her hands developed calluses. The ache in her ribs faded to a dull throb she could ignore. She learned to walk on ice without falling, to carry the water bucket without spilling, to split wood with an efficiency that surprised her. Kaylin never praised her, but he stopped watching her like she was about to die, and that felt like a victory. 2 weeks in, she finally asked the question that had been gnawing at her. Why do you live up here? They were sitting by the fire, eating a stew he'd made from rabbit and roots. Kaylin was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Because people are worse than the cold, he said finally. That's not an answer. He looked at her, his pale eyes unreadable. It's the only one you're getting. She let it drop. But that night, she woke to the sound of screaming. She sat up, heart pounding, and saw Kaylin across the cave. He was thrashing in his sleep, his face twisted in anguish, words tumbling out that she couldn't understand. She crawled over to him, hesitating, then touched his shoulder. Kaylin. He woke with a snarl, his hand shooting out to grab her wrist. His grip was like iron, his eyes wild. It's me, she said quietly. You were dreaming. He stared at her for a moment, breathing hard, then released her and turned away. Get back to sleep. Are you? I said, get back to sleep. She did, but she didn't forget. Month. 3 weeks in, the wolves came. Alina was hauling water when she heard the howl, distant but unmistakable. She froze, the bucket slipping from her hands and spilling across the snow. Hunters. She ran back to the cave, her heart hammering. Kaylin was sharpening a blade when she burst in, breathless. Wolves, she gasped, coming from the south. He looked up, his expression shifting to something hard and dangerous. How many? I don't know. I just heard the howl. He stood, crossing to a stack of weapons she hadn't paid much attention to before. He pulled out a bow, a quiver of arrows, 2 long knives. He tossed one of the knives to her. You know how to use that? Yes. Good. Stay here. Don't come out unless I call for you. What are you going to do? What I always do. He strapped the quiver to his back and headed for the cave entrance. Survive. She watched him disappear into the snow and realized she was shaking. The weight was agony. She paced the cave, knife in hand, listening. Minutes stretched into hours. She heard nothing but the wind. Then a howl, closer this time. And then the sound of fighting, snarls, the clash of metal, a scream cut short. Alina couldn't stand it anymore. She grabbed her cloak and ran outside. The scene was chaos. 4 wolves circled Kaelin, massive and snarling, their eyes glowing in the dim light. 2 more lay dead in the snow, arrows jutting from their bodies. Kaelin moved like water, his blade flashing, but he was bleeding from a gash on his arm. One of the wolves shifted mid-lunge, becoming a man, one of Alaric's hunters. She recognized him. Torvin, a brutal fighter with no mercy. There she! Torvin shouted, pointing at Alina. The Luna! The other wolves turned toward her. Kaelin moved between them and her, his blade up. Run, he said, his voice deadly calm. I'm not leaving you. Run! She ran, but not away. She circled around, staying low, and came up behind one of the wolves. She drove her knife into its flank with everything she had. The wolf howled and turned on her, snapping. She barely dodged, rolling in the snow. Kaelin took advantage of the distraction, taking down another wolf with a brutal efficiency that shocked her. Torvin shifted back to human form, blood streaming from a wound in his side. The king wants you back, Luna, he snarled, dead or alive. Tell the king, Alina said, her voice shaking but firm, that I'm dead. Then I'll bring him your corpse. He lunged. Kaelin intercepted him, and they went down in a tangle of limbs. Alina saw Torvin's claws rake across Kaelin's chest, saw blood spray across the snow. She didn't think. She just moved. She grabbed a fallen arrow and drove it through Torvin's back. He convulsed, gasping, then went still. The remaining wolves fled. Kaelin pushed Torvin's body off him and stood, breathing hard, blood streaming from multiple wounds. He looked at Alina, his expression unreadable. You didn't run, he said. No. You should have. You would have died. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, to her shock, he smiled. It was brief, barely there, but real. Maybe, he said. Come on. We need to move. They'll send more. They packed in minutes, taking only what they could carry. Kaelin led her higher into the mountains, to a place he said the hunters wouldn't follow. It was a narrow cleft in the rock, barely wide enough for 2 people, that opened into a small cave warmed by a natural hot spring. Steam rose in the cold air, creating an eerie, otherworldly atmosphere. How did you find this? Alina asked, staring. I've been up here a long time. He set down his pack and winced, pressing a hand to his chest where Torvin had clawed him. Let me see, Alina said. I'm fine. You're bleeding. Let me see. He hesitated, then pulled off his shirt. The wounds were deep, 3 parallel gashes across his chest. She sucked in a breath. You need to clean these, she said. I know how to dress a wound. Then let me help. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. She worked carefully, cleaning the wounds with water from the hot spring, tearing strips from her own shirt to bind them. Her hands were steady despite everything. Why did you help me? He asked quietly. Because you saved my life, she said. And because I'm not the kind of person who runs when someone needs help. Even when they told you to? Especially then. He was quiet for a moment. You're different than I thought. So are you. That night, as they sat by a small fire in the new cave, Kaelin finally spoke. I was part of a pack once, he said, staring into the flames. A long time ago. I had a mate. A daughter. Alina's breath caught. What happened? The alpha wanted my mate. I was in his way. His voice was flat, emotionless. He killed my daughter. Made me watch. Then he exiled me and took my mate as his own. I'm sorry, Alina whispered. I survived, Kaelin said. But I learned that pack law is just another word for cruelty dressed up as honor. So I left, came here, and I've been alone ever since. You're not alone now, she said quietly. He looked at her, something shifting in his expression. No, he said. I suppose I'm not. The weeks that followed were different. Kaelin still pushed her, still demanded she work, but there was a shift in how he taught her. He showed her how to hunt, how to track, how to fight in ways that use speed and cunning over strength. He taught her the mountain, its moods and dangers. And she changed. The soft edges she'd carried from Iron Ridge burned away. Her body grew lean and hard, her movements precise. She could run for hours without tiring. She could fight without hesitation. One morning she woke and realized something had changed inside her too. The bond with Alaric, it was gone, completely severed. She felt nothing when she thought of him. No pain, no longing, just nothing. She was free. But that freedom came with a price. Because that same morning, as she stood outside the cave watching the sunrise, she felt it again. The flutter. Stronger this time. Her hand went to her stomach. She was 4 months along now. Soon it would show. She had to tell Kaelin. She found him sharpening his blade, as he often did. I need to tell you something, she said. He looked up. What? I'm pregnant. The blade stilled in his hands. He stared at her, his expression unreadable. The king's child, she said. That's why I ran. He declared me barren, paraded his mistress and her son in front of the entire council, but I was already carrying his heir. He just didn't know. Kaelin was silent for a long moment. Then he set down the blade. Does he know now? I don't think so. I didn't tell anyone. He'll come for you, Kaelin said. When he finds out. He'll come with everything he has. I know. You should have told me sooner. Would you have helped me if you'd known? He stood, looking at her with those pale, unreadable eyes. I don't know, he said honestly, but you're here now, and the child doesn't deserve to die for its father's sins. Neither do I. No, he agreed, you don't. He crossed to her and, to her shock, placed his hand gently on her stomach. The gesture was so unexpected, so careful, that tears stung her eyes. We'll keep you safe, he said quietly. Both of you. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this? He met her gaze. Because you didn't run, he said. When you could have. When you should have. You stayed and fought. That means something. And in that moment, something shifted between them. Something neither of them had words for yet. The attack came at dawn 3 weeks later. Alina woke to the sound of howling, not 1 or 2 wolves, but a chorus, dozens. She sat up, her heart in her throat. Kaelin was already at the cave entrance, looking out. How many? She asked. Too many. His face was grim. He brought an army. She joined him at the entrance and felt her blood run cold. Below, filling the valley, were wolves. 50, at least. And at the center of them, standing in human form, was Alaric. Even from this distance, she could see his face, could see the fury there. Alina! His voice echoed off the mountains, magically amplified. I know you're up there. Come down, now! Kaelin looked at her. What do you want to do? She stared down at Alaric, at the man who had betrayed her, humiliated her, tried to cage her, and she made her choice. I'm going down, she said. That's suicide. No, she said, her voice steady. That's the end of this, one way or another. She grabbed her cloak and started down the mountain. Kaelin caught her arm. Then I'm coming with you. You don't have to. I know. His grip tightened. But I'm done being alone. Together, they descended. When they reached the valley floor, the wolves surrounded them immediately, snarling and snapping. But Alaric held up a hand and they fell back. He stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Alina. You look different, he said. I am different. His gaze flicked to Kaelin. And who is this? None of your concern, Kaelin said flatly. Alaric's eyes narrowed. Then he looked back at Alina, and his expression changed. His nostrils flared. His eyes widened. You're pregnant, he said, shock and rage warring in his voice. Alina lifted her chin. Yes, with my child. Yes. The silence that followed was absolute. Every wolf, every hunter went still. You lied to me, Alaric said, his voice shaking. You let me think. You let everyone think. You lied to yourself, Alina interrupted. You wanted an excuse for your betrayal, so you made me the failure. But I was never barren, Alaric. You were just too proud to wait. His face twisted. You will come back with me. Now. You and my heir. No. That's not a request. And this isn't a negotiation. She stepped forward, and he actually took a step back. I'm done being your possession, your prop, your scapegoat. You wanted a legacy? You threw it away the night you chose your pride over your mate. You're still bound to me. The bond is broken, she said. I felt it snap 3 weeks ago. I'm not yours anymore, Alaric. I never really was. His face went white, then red. Then I'll take the child, one way or another. He shifted, and 50 wolves charged. The charge came like an avalanche. 50 wolves, teeth bared and eyes blazing, surged forward in a wave of fur and fury. The sound was deafening. Snarls, howls, the thunder of paws against frozen ground. Alina's instinct screamed at her to run, but she held her ground. Running was what the old Alina would have done. The queen who smiled through humiliation. The mate who accepted betrayal. She wasn't that woman anymore. Kalen moved first. He shifted mid-stride, his human form exploding into a wolf larger than any she'd seen, silver gray with those same pale eyes, scars visible even through his fur. He hit the first wave like a battering ram, scattering wolves in every direction. But there were too many. Alina shifted too, her body changing in a rush of heat and pain. Her wolf was smaller than most, dark as midnight with amber eyes, but she'd learned to use that. Speed over strength, precision over power. She darted between larger wolves, her teeth finding throats, tendons, soft bellies. The battle was chaos. Blood stained the snow. Wolves went down on both sides. Alina lost track of time, lost herself in the rhythm of survival. Dodge, strike, move. Her pregnancy slowed her slightly, made her cautious of her center, but adrenaline overrode everything else. Then she saw him. Alaric, still in human form, standing on a ridge above the fighting. Watching, not participating, just watching, like this was a spectacle arranged for his entertainment. Rage, white-hot and clean, burned through her. She broke from the fight and ran toward him, shifting back to human as she climbed. Her body protested, but she ignored it. When she reached the ridge, breathless and bleeding from a dozen small wounds, he turned to face her. Call them off, she said. No. People are dying. My people are following orders, Alaric said coldly, as they should, as you should have. I'm not your subject anymore. You're carrying my heir. That makes you mine until I say otherwise. She laughed, a bitter sound. You really believe that, don't you? You really think you have the right? I have every right. His composure cracked, fury bleeding through. I am a king. You were nothing before me, some mid-rank wolf with a pretty face. I made you queen. I gave you everything. You gave me a cage and called it a crown. I gave you purpose. You gave me humiliation. Her voice rose, carrying over the sounds of battle. You paraded your mistress in front of me. You declared me worthless. You broke every vow we made. Because you failed! He stepped toward her, his face twisted. 6 years, Alina. 6 years of watching you smile at councils and pour tea for visiting alphas while my legacy died in your barren womb. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to love me, she said quietly. You were supposed to wait, to trust me. Instead, you believed what you wanted to believe because it gave you permission to do what you wanted to do. I did what was necessary. You did what was easy. She touched her stomach, the gesture deliberate. This child? It was conceived before you ever touched her. I was going to tell you. I was waiting for the right moment, but you couldn't wait. You couldn't trust. And now you've lost everything. His eyes fixed on her hand, on the slight swell now visible beneath her torn shirt. Something crossed his face, regret, maybe, or realization. But it was gone too quickly. Then I'll take the child, he said, after it's born. You can rot in these mountains for all I care, but my heir comes back to Iron Ridge. No. You don't get to say no. Watch me." He shifted. His wolf was massive, dark as coal, every inch an alpha. He lunged at her, and she barely dodged, rolling across the rock. She shifted too, but she knew she couldn't win this fight. He was bigger, stronger, trained since birth for dominance. But she didn't need to win. She just needed to survive long enough. They circled each other, snarling. He struck first, his teeth catching her shoulder. Pain exploded through her, but she twisted away, her own teeth finding his leg. He roared and threw her off. She hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from her lungs. He loomed over her, ready for the killing blow. And then Kaelin was there. He hit Alaric from the side with enough force to send both of them tumbling off the ridge. They fell 10 feet, hitting the slope below in a tangle of fur and claws. Alina scrambled to the edge and looked down. The two wolves were locked in combat, savage and brutal. Kaelin was scarred, experienced, vicious. But Alaric was an alpha in his prime, and he fought with the fury of wounded pride. Alina shifted back to human and started down the slope. Her shoulder screamed where Alaric had bitten her, blood soaking her shirt. She ignored it. By the time she reached them, Kaelin had Alaric pinned, teeth at his throat. But he wasn't killing him, just holding him there. "Enough!" Alina's voice cut through the snarls. "Everyone, stop!" Slowly, impossibly, the fighting ceased. Wolves on both sides pulled back, panting, bloodied. They looked at her. The Luna who'd vanished, who'd been declared barren and worthless, who'd somehow survived the Frostwild. Alaric shifted back to human, Kaelin's teeth still at his throat. He looked up at her with hatred and something else. Fear, maybe. Or shock that she was still standing. "You want your heir?" Alina said, her voice carrying across the silent valley. "Then you're going to hear the truth. All of it. In front of witnesses." "I don't—" Kaelin's teeth tightened, and Alaric fell silent. Alina looked at the assembled wolves, hunters from Iron Ridge, Alaric's loyalists, some she recognized from her time as Luna. They were watching her with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. "My name is Alina Vayan," she said. "I was Luna of Iron Ridge for 6 years. 3 months ago, King Alaric summoned me to the Great Hall and presented his mistress and the child she bore him. He declared me barren before the council, unfit to carry the bloodline. He humiliated me publicly, then demanded I remain at his side as a figurehead while his bastard son took the throne." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some of the wolves shifted back to human form to hear better. "What he didn't know," Alina continued, "was that I was already pregnant, 3 weeks along when he made his announcement. I had been waiting to tell him, waiting to be certain, but he couldn't wait. He'd already decided I was the problem, that I was broken. So I left." More murmurs, louder now. "She's lying," Alaric said, his voice strained with Kaelin's teeth still at his throat. "She would have told me." "Why?" Alina demanded. "So you could keep me prisoner, lock me away?" "I saw what you were, Alaric. I saw that you didn't want a partner. You wanted control. You wanted me to be grateful for your attention while you took what you wanted from someone else." "That's not—" "The bond broke," she said, and the crowd went silent. 3 weeks ago, I felt it snap. The mate bond that should have held us together, it's gone. Because what we had wasn't love, it was ownership, and I refused to be owned." She turned to address the assembled wolves directly. "I didn't fail him. He failed me. Failed us. And this child," she touched her stomach again, "is proof that everything he said was a lie. I was never barren, I was just inconvenient." One of the hunters, a woman Alina recognized, someone who'd served in the castle guard, stepped forward. "Is this true?" she asked Alaric. "It doesn't matter," Alaric started. "Is it true?" the woman demanded. He said nothing. The silence was damning. Another wolf shifted to human form, an older man, one of the council members. "You brought us all this way," he said slowly, "risked our lives in the Frostwild, to reclaim a Luna you publicly shamed and discarded?" "To reclaim my heir," Alaric corrected. "Your heir who exists because she was never barren in the first place?" The council member's voice was sharp. "The heir you could have had if you'd simply waited? If you'd trusted your mate instead of betting the first woman who offered? Watch your tongue. You made us complicit in your lie," another voice called out. A younger hunter, someone Alina didn't recognize. "You sent us after a pregnant woman. You nearly killed her, killed your own child, because of your pride." The crowd was turning. Alina could see it in their faces, hear it in their voices. The story Alaric had told them, the narrative of a barren Luna who needed to be retrieved, was falling apart. "She abandoned her pack," Alaric said desperately. "She broke her oaths." "You broke them first," Alina said quietly. "The moment you touched her, the moment you decided I wasn't good enough. Every wolf here knows the mate bond, knows what it means. You violated it, not me. I just refused to die quietly for your convenience." She looked at the assembled wolves, at the faces watching her. Some hostile, some uncertain, some incredibly sympathetic. "I'm not asking to come back," she said. "I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know the truth, that the king you follow built his power on a lie, and that lie nearly killed 2 innocent lives." She turned to Kaelin. "Let him go." Kaelin released Alaric slowly, stepping back but keeping himself between the king and Alina. Alaric stood, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. Blood dripped from wounds on his shoulder and leg. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is," Alina replied. "You have no claim on me. The bond is broken. I'm not your Luna. I'm not your mate. I'm just a woman you wronged, who survived despite you. The child, she is mine," she said firmly. "Not yours. Mine. You gave up any right to this child when you declared me worthless, when you chose your pride over your family. I am still a king." "Then act like one," she said. "Go home. Tell your council the truth. Raise the son your mistress gave you. Leave me and mine alone." For a moment she thought he would attack again. His whole body was taut with rage, his hands clenched into fists. But the hunters around him weren't moving. They were watching, waiting to see what he would do. Slowly, the fight drained out of him, not because he'd changed, not because he'd seen reason, but because he'd lost the crowd, lost the narrative. And a king without support is just a man. "This isn't over," he repeated, but the words were hollow. "Yes," Alina said softly. "It is." Alaric shifted back to wolf form and ran. Not back toward Iron Ridge, but away from the crowd, away from the witnesses, fleeing the scene of his humiliation. A few of the loyalists followed him, but most stayed, uncertain and confused. The woman who'd spoken first, the guard, approached Alina cautiously. "I served in your household," she said. "I remember you. You were kind." Alina nodded, not trusting her voice. "He told us you'd gone mad with grief," the woman continued, "that you'd fled into the Frostwild to die, that we were on a mercy mission to save you. I know what he told you. He lied." "Yes." The woman looked at the other hunters, then back at Alina. "What will you do now?" "Survive," Alina said. "It's what I'm good at." The woman nodded slowly, then shifted and left. One by one, the other hunters followed. Some looked back. Some didn't. But they all left. Soon, only Kaelin remained. He was still in wolf form, watching her with those pale, unreadable eyes. Then he shifted, standing before her in his scarred human skin. "You didn't run," he said. "Neither did you. I'm used to fighting. So am I now." He smiled, brief and real, and something warm bloomed in Alina's chest despite the cold, despite the pain, despite everything. "We should go," he said, "before he comes back with reinforcements." "Where?" "North, deeper into the Frostwild. There are places even kings won't follow." "Will there be shelter?" The baby. "There will be shelter," he promised. "I know a place. It's not much, but it's safe, warm, hidden." Alina looked at him, this scarred, damaged man who'd saved her life, who'd fought beside her, who'd chosen her over his solitude. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached out and touched her face, gentle despite the calluses on his hands. "Because you fought when you could have surrendered," he said. "Because you stood when you could have knelt. Because you're stronger than any of them know." He paused. "And because I'm tired of being alone." "So am I," she whispered. He took her hand. "Then let's stop." They walked north together, leaving the battlefield behind. The snow had started falling again, covering the blood, covering the tracks. By morning, it would be like the fight had never happened. But Alina knew better. She'd stood before her former mate in his army. She'd spoken her truth before witnesses. She'd survived. And she'd won. Not through strength or violence, but through something more powerful. Through refusal, through endurance, through the simple radical act of saying no and meaning it. Behind them, the mountains loomed. Ahead, the path was uncertain, but for the first time since that terrible night in the Great Hall, Alina felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. They reached the new shelter by nightfall, a cave system Kaelin knew, warmed by hot springs and hidden behind a waterfall that froze in winter, creating a curtain of ice. Inside, it was warm and dry, safe. Alina sank down by the fire Kaelin built, exhaustion crashing over her. Her shoulder throbbed where Alaric had bitten her, but the wound wasn't deep. She'd survive. She always did. Kaelin sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "What happens now?" she asked. "We wait," he said. "Winter will seal the passes soon. No one will be able to reach us until spring. And then? Then we decide. Stay here. Move on. Build something new." He looked at her. "Whatever you want." What she wanted. The question felt foreign. For so long, she'd been what others wanted. Dutiful daughter, perfect mate, gracious Luna. She'd shaped herself to fit their expectations, and it had nearly destroyed her. Now, for the first time, she could choose. "I want to stay," she said. "For now. Raise the baby somewhere safe. Figure out who I am without a crown or a title." And after? She thought about the settlement where Garrett lived, about the people struggling to survive in the harsh north, about the power she'd glimpsed in herself when she'd stood before Alaric's army and refused to break. "After," she said slowly, "maybe we build something better, something that doesn't require people to break themselves to fit, something where strength isn't just about dominance." Kaelin studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "I think I'd like that," he said. That night, as the wind howled outside and the fire crackled inside, Alina placed her hand on her stomach and felt the flutter of life within her. This child would be born free, born to a mother who'd walked through fire and ice to claim her own life, born to a future that hadn't been written yet. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. For now at least, it was enough. She looked at Kaelin, at this man who'd seen the worst of humanity and chosen kindness anyway, who'd been broken and put himself back together, scarred but whole. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not letting me die in the snow." He shook his head. "You wouldn't have died. You're too stubborn." She laughed, surprised by the sound. When was the last time she'd laughed? She couldn't remember. "Maybe," she said. "But you made it easier." "Good." He settled back against the cave wall. "You should sleep. Tomorrow we'll reinforce the defenses. Stock supplies for winter. Always planning ahead. It's how you survive up here." But as Alina closed her eyes, she thought about more than just survival. She thought about the moment when the hunters had started to believe her, when the narrative had shifted, when Alaric's power had cracked. She'd done that, not with claws or teeth, but with truth. And if she could do that once, she could do it again. The thought followed her into sleep, warm and promising. Outside, the first major storm of winter began. The storm lasted 3 days. Snow piled against the frozen waterfall until it was a solid wall of ice sealing them inside. The wind screamed outside like something alive and furious, but inside the cave, warmed by the hot springs that bubbled up from deep in the earth, Alina and Kaelin waited. They reinforced the entrance with rocks and packed snow. They stocked firewood in neat piles. They rationed food carefully, making sure every meal would stretch. They didn't talk much during those 3 days. There wasn't much to say. The battle was over, but the war, the real one, the one for survival, continued as it always had in the Frostwild. On the 4th day, the storm broke. Alina woke to silence. Not the howling wind or the sharp crack of ice fracturing under pressure, but actual silence, deep and complete. She sat up carefully, her hand going instinctively to her stomach. The baby had been active lately, moving and kicking at odd hours. 5 months now. Soon she'd be too big to move easily through the narrow passages and steep slopes that defined life in these mountains. Kaelin was already awake, standing at the cave entrance, looking out through a gap he'd carved in the ice wall with his knife. "It's over," he said, without turning around. She joined him, wrapping her cloak tighter against the cold that seeped through the opening. Beyond the ice, the world was transformed. Everything was white and still, pristine and untouched. The sun reflected off fresh snow so brightly it hurt to look at directly. Beautiful and deadly in equal measure, like everything in the Frostwild. "We should check the settlement," Kaelin said. "Make sure Garrett and the others survived." "You think they might not have? That was a bad storm, the worst I've seen in years. People die up here in weather like that." They broke through the ice wall using axes and their own body weight and started the journey south. It took most of the day, trudging through waist-deep snow that hadn't settled yet. Alina's legs burned with the effort, and more than once, Kaelin had to pull her out of a drift she'd sunk into. By the time they reached the valley where the settlement huddled against the mountain, the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold and purple. The settlement had survived, but barely. 2 cabins had collapsed under the weight of accumulated snow, their roofs caved in. A third had lost its entire western wall to the wind. Garrett was in the center of it all, organizing repairs, barking orders at people who looked exhausted and half-frozen but determined. He saw them approaching and stopped mid-sentence, his weathered face registering surprise. "You're alive," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "So are you," Alina replied. He looked her over, his sharp eyes lingering on her stomach. She was showing clearly now, even under her heavy cloak and layers of wool. The curve was unmistakable. "Pregnant?" he said flatly. "Yes." "That explains a lot." He turned back to the collapsed cabin, gesturing at 2 men who were pulling salvageable lumber from the wreckage. "Mari, get them some food. They look like they've been eating pine bark and snow for a week." Mari appeared from one of the intact cabins, grinning despite her obvious exhaustion. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands were wrapped in bandages. "Heard you had some excitement down in the lower valley," she said. "You could say that." Over bowls of thin stew made from dried meat and the last of their root vegetables, Alina and Kaelin told them what had happened. The army of 50 wolves, the confrontation with Alaric, the truth spoken before witnesses, the king's retreat. Garrett listened without interrupting, his weathered face unreadable, occasionally sipping from a wooden cup. When they finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire that crackled in the hall's central hearth. "So the king of Iron Ridge came all this way," he said finally, "dragged 50 wolves into the worst terrain on the continent, got his ass handed to him by his pregnant former mate and one scarred hermit, and then ran away with his tail between his legs. That about sum it up?" "More or less," Kaelin said, the corner of his mouth twitching. Garrett laughed, a harsh bark of sound that made several people look up from their own meals. "Wish I'd seen it. Would have been worth the price of admission." "It wasn't pretty," Alina said quietly. "Best things never are." He leaned back against the wall. "So what now? You planning to stay up here? Raise that baby in the frozen north where winter lasts 8 months and summer is a week of mud?" "For now," Alina said. "At least until spring. After that," she trailed off, uncertain. "After that, you'll figure it out," Garrett said. "That's what people do up here. Figure it out or die trying." "Inspiring," Kaelin muttered. "I'm not here to inspire. I'm here to survive." But Garrett's expression softened slightly. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need. You've both earned it. Anyone who fights raiders and kings has a place at my fire." Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Alina and Kaelin helped with repairs at the settlement, earning their keep and their place. She taught some of the younger wolves how to fight, not the formal ceremonial combat she'd learned at Iron Ridge with its rules and rituals, but the practical, brutal techniques Kaelin had beaten into her over months of training. How to use speed and cunning when you were smaller, how to strike at vulnerable points, how to turn an opponent's strength against them, how to survive when everything was stacked against you. Word spread beyond the settlement. People started calling her the Luna of the Frostwild, though she never claimed the title and actively discouraged it. She was just Alina, just a woman trying to survive and help others do the same. But the name stuck anyway, whispered around fires and carried on the wind to other struggling outposts scattered across the mountains. 6 weeks after the confrontation with Alaric, as she sat by the fire in the settlement hall mending a torn cloak, a stranger arrived. He was young, maybe 20, and he looked half dead from the cold. His lips were blue. His fingers were blackened with early frostbite. Garrett brought him to the fire and wrapped him in blankets while Mari forced hot broth down his throat. "I'm looking for someone," the young man said when he could speak without his teeth chattering. "A woman. Used to be Luna of Iron Ridge." Alina's hand went to the knife at her belt, her body tensing. Why? He looked at her, and recognition dawned in his eyes despite his exhaustion. You're her. I saw you. In the valley. When you faced down the king. Who's asking? My name is Darian. I was part of the hunting party, the one that came after you. He raised his hands quickly when Kaelin moved closer, protective. I'm not here to fight. I swear it. I'm here because things are falling apart back home. The hall went quiet. Even the usual background noise of people eating and talking faded away. What do you mean falling apart? Alina asked carefully. After you told the truth, after everyone saw what really happened, heard what you said, people started questioning the king. The council demanded answers. Some of the allied pacts withdrew their support. Others are threatening to unless changes are made. He leaned forward, his voice urgent. The king's mate, Seraphine, the woman with the baby, she left, took the child and disappeared in the middle of the night. Turns out she never wanted to be there in the first place. She was just a servant he got pregnant and then elevated to cover his lie about you being barren. Alina felt a sharp pang of sympathy for the woman she'd only seen once. Another pawn in Alaric's game. Another person used and discarded. The king is losing control, Darian continued. People are angry. They feel betrayed. They're realizing that if he lied about you, what else has he lied about? Some of the younger wolves are even talking about challenging him for leadership. That's not my problem, Alina said, but her voice lacked conviction. I know you don't owe us anything, but he hesitated, glancing around at the watching faces. There are people who want you to come back. Not as his mate, never that, but as an alternative, as proof that there's another way to lead, another way to live. No. Just listen. I said no. Alina stood, her hands clenched. I left that world behind. I walked away from it bleeding and broken and pregnant. I nearly died a dozen times getting here. I'm not going back to save people who didn't save me, who stood there and watched while he humiliated me and did nothing. But you could make a real difference. I already made a difference, she said, her voice rising. I told the truth. I survived. I showed them it could be done. What they do with that example is up to them. I'm done being used by anyone for any reason, even good ones. Darian looked like he wanted to argue further, but Kaelin's expression stopped him. There was something dangerous in those pale eyes, something that promised violence if the young man pushed too hard. She said no, Kaelin said quietly. You should leave. In the morning, when you've rested. But you should leave. The young man left the next morning as suggested, disappointed but alive. Garrett gave him supplies for the journey back, more than he probably deserved, but Garrett was practical about these things. Word would spread that the settlement was fair even to those who came with unwelcome requests. But Darian's words stayed with Alina like a splinter under the skin. She thought about Iron Ridge, about the people she'd left behind, the servants who'd been kind to her, the guards who'd looked the other way when she needed privacy, the children she'd seen in the streets. She thought about the system that had enabled Alaric's cruelty, that had allowed him to betray and discard her without consequence. She thought about all the wolves who suffered under leaders who saw them as tools rather than people. Winter deepened. The days grew shorter and colder. Alina's pregnancy advanced relentlessly. At 7 months, she could barely walk without waddling, her balance thrown off by the weight she carried. At 8 months, she couldn't sleep lying down because the baby pressed on her lungs and made breathing difficult. Kaelin was endlessly patient, helping her up when she struggled, rubbing her aching back, never once complaining about the burden she'd become. You didn't sign up for this, she said one night, frustrated with her own helplessness. Neither did you. I chose this, the baby, I mean, when I could have... She stopped, not wanting to finish the thought. Don't, he said firmly. Don't second-guess yourself. You chose life, your life and the baby's life. That's never wrong. Even if it's hard? Especially then. The baby came on the first day of spring, when the ice was just beginning to melt. Alina woke before dawn to the first contraction. She knew immediately what it was, a tightening across her belly, a pressure that made her gasp and grab at the furs beneath her. The baby had dropped lower 2 days ago, and she'd been expecting this, but expectation didn't make it less terrifying. Kaelin, she said, her voice tight. He was beside her in seconds, his eyes wide. What is it? The baby. It's coming. It's time. He went pale, which would have been funny under other circumstances. This man who'd fought raiders and wolves and survived alone in the harshest environment on the continent looked absolutely terrified of childbirth. "What do I do?" he asked. "Get Mari. She's delivered babies before. Lots of them." He ran. The labor was long and brutal. 20 hours of pain that made everything else she'd endured, the river, the cold, the fights, the betrayal, seem like preparation for this moment. Mari coached her through it, calm and experienced, her hands steady and sure. Kaelin held Alina's hand and looked like he might pass out at several points, but he never left. "You can leave," Alina gasped between contractions, sweat soaking her hair. "You don't have to watch this." "Not a chance," he said, his grip tightening on her hand. "I'm not leaving you." When the baby finally came, screaming and red-faced and covered in blood and fluid, Alina wept. Not from pain, though there was plenty of that. Not from relief, though she felt that too. But from joy. From the sheer overwhelming reality of holding her daughter, in her arms. A daughter. Not the son Alaric had wanted and demanded, not the male heir he'd tried to take from her. A daughter with dark hair plastered to her tiny skull, and amber eyes that squinted against the light, and a cry that could wake the dead. "She's beautiful," Mari said softly, cleaning the baby with gentle efficiency. "Perfect and healthy. 10 fingers, 10 toes. Good strong lungs, obviously." Alina looked down at the tiny, perfect face and felt something shift inside her, something fundamental and permanent. This child was proof. Proof that she'd survived. Proof that Alaric had been wrong about everything. Proof that she could build something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. "What will you call her?" Kaelin asked. He was still holding her other hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, his face wet with tears he didn't bother to hide. Alina thought for a moment, looking at her daughter's fierce little face. Then she smiled. "Thora," she said. "It means thunder." Kaelin smiled back, and it transformed his entire scarred face into something beautiful. Perfect. The first weeks with Thora were exhausting in ways Alina hadn't anticipated. She barely slept, constantly feeding and changing and soothing. The baby wanted to eat every 2 hours, day and night. She cried at odd times for reasons Alina couldn't decipher. But Kaelin was there, helping in ways that surprised and touched her. He was gentle with the baby, his large scarred hands careful and patient as he changed swaddling or rocked her to sleep when Alina was too exhausted to move. "You're good at this?" she said one night, watching him pace the cave with Thora against his shoulder. "I had practice," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the baby's fussing. "With my daughter, before I lost her." He didn't say more, but he didn't need to. Alina understood the weight of that loss, the ghost he was confronting every time he held Thora. "You're a good father," she said. "I'm not her father. Not by blood. But you're here. You choose to be here. That counts for something. That counts for everything." He looked at her over Thora's small head, and something passed between them. An understanding, an acknowledgement of what they'd become to each other. Not mates in the traditional sense. The bond that had connected her to Alaric was gone, severed completely. But this was something different, something chosen rather than fated. "I love you," she said. The words surprised her as they came out, but they were true. Completely true. He smiled, soft and real and rare. "I know. I love you too. We're a strange little family. The best ones usually are." 2 months after Thora's birth, when the baby was just beginning to smile and make sounds that weren't crying, riders came to the settlement. Not hunters this time. Diplomats. 3 of them, wearing the formal colors of Iron Ridge, green and silver, but flying a white flag of truce. Their horses looked exhausted from the journey. Garrett met them at the settlement entrance, his arms crossed. "State your business." "We're here to speak with Alina Vane," the lead diplomat said. She was an older woman with gray hair pulled back severely and sharp, intelligent eyes that took in everything. "She doesn't want to speak with representatives from Iron Ridge. Please, we've come a very long way through very dangerous terrain. We just want to talk, nothing more." Garrett looked back at the hall where Alina was feeding Thora by the fire. Then he sighed heavily. "Wait here, I'll ask." Alina listened as Garrett explained who had come and why. Then she looked down at her daughter, at this tiny life that depended entirely on her choices. "Bring them in," she said finally. "But they talk while I feed my baby. and Kaelin stays with me." "Understood." The diplomats entered the hall cautiously, as if expecting a trap. The lead woman stopped when she saw Alina, her eyes widening at the sight of the baby nursing contentedly. "Luna?" "Just Alina," she interrupted firmly. "I'm not Luna of anything, not anymore." "Of course. Forgive me." The woman sat when Alina gestured to a chair across the fire. "My name is Cordelia. I serve on the Iron Ridge Council, have for 20 years. "I remember you," Alina said. "You sat 3 seats from the end. You never spoke much." "No, I've learned it's often wiser to listen." Cordelia folded her hands in her lap. "I voted against your former mate's decision to present his mistress publicly. Not that my vote mattered. I was outnumbered." Alina said nothing, waiting. Thora finished nursing and she shifted the baby to her shoulder to burp her. "Things have changed dramatically since you left," Cordelia said carefully, choosing her words. "The king's power is failing, crumbling really. Seraphine fled with the child he claimed was his heir. Turns out she was coerced into the relationship and took the first opportunity to escape. The other pacts have withdrawn their alliances. 3 of them have made formal declarations of non-support. There's serious talk of civil war if things don't change soon." "That's not my problem," Alina said, but her voice lacked the conviction it had held when she'd said the same thing to Darian. "I know it's not. You owe Iron Ridge nothing, less than nothing, honestly." Cordelia leaned forward slightly. "But I believe it could be your opportunity." "Opportunity for what?" "To change things. The council is prepared to offer you a choice. Come back, not as the king's mate. That bond is broken and everyone knows it. But as an independent leader, we'll support you in formally challenging his authority and creating a new system of governance, one based on merit and consent rather than just strength and bloodlines." Alina stared at her. "Why would I want that? Why would I want to go back to that place?" "Because you saw the rot in the old system firsthand," Cordelia said quietly. "Because you know what it's like to be powerless under it, to have your life controlled by someone else's whims and lies. Because you could build something better. Something that protects people like you instead of crushing them." Alina looked at Kaelin, who sat nearby, his expression carefully neutral. Then at Thora, now sleeping peacefully against her shoulder, tiny fingers curled into fist. "What about him?" she asked. "The king? Alaric? He's still in power, technically, but he's vulnerable in ways he's never been before. If you returned with proof of his lies, with the child he declared impossible, it would destroy whatever credibility he has left. The council would have grounds to remove him formally." "And you think I want revenge?" "I think you want justice," Cordelia said. "There's a difference. Revenge is about punishing him. Justice is about making sure he can't do to anyone else what he did to you." Alina was quiet for a long moment, gently rocking Thora. The fire crackled. Outside, she could hear the normal sounds of the settlement, people working, talking, living. Then she shook her head slowly. "No." Cordelia's face fell. "But I'm not interested in ruling Iron Ridge or challenging anyone or reforming systems," Alina said firmly. "I'm not interested in revenge or justice or politics or any of it. I'm interested in raising my daughter somewhere safe and building a life that's mine, that I choose, every single day." "You could help so many people." "I already did help them," Alina interrupted. "I told the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. I survived when everyone expected me to die. I showed them that it's possible to walk away from power that destroys you and build something new. What they do with that example is up to them. I'm done being used by anyone for anything, even for supposedly good reasons." Cordelia looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Alina's expression stopped her. She nodded slowly, accepting defeat. "I understand, truly, I do. But if you change your mind, the offer remains open." "I won't change my mind." The diplomats left the next morning, disappointed but respectful. Garrett gave them supplies and directions for the safest route back south. But the conversation stayed with Alina like an old wound that ached in cold weather. She thought about power and responsibility and whether she owed anything to people who'd stood by and watched her destruction. She thought about Thora and what kind of world she was bringing her daughter into. She thought about the difference between revenge and justice, and whether refusing to pursue either made her wise or cowardly. "Do you think I'm wrong?" she asked Kaelin that night, as they lay together in the dark, Thora sleeping peacefully between them. Wrong about what? Not going back, not trying to fix things. I could make a real difference there. He was quiet for a moment, thinking. You survived something that should have killed you, he said finally. You built a new life from absolutely nothing. You're raising a child in one of the harshest environments on the continent. That's not selfish or cowardly. That's human. That's choosing yourself for once. But I could help so many people. You could also die, he said bluntly, turning to face her. Going back puts you in danger, puts Thora in danger, puts all of this in danger. Is changing a system that destroyed you worth risking the life you've built? I don't know, she whispered. Then don't go. Stay here. Stay safe. Let them figure out their own problems. But the question gnawed at her, persistent and uncomfortable. A month later, word came that Alaric had been formally challenged and defeated. The messenger who brought the news was breathless with excitement. Apparently, it had been a spectacular fight that lasted nearly an hour before Alaric finally submitted. He wasn't killed, which was unusual in formal challenges. Instead, exile was the punishment. He'd been driven from Iron Ridge, stripped of all power and titles, forbidden from ever returning. The council had installed a temporary leadership council while they worked on reforming the succession laws and governance structures. The messenger said it was unprecedented, revolutionary, the beginning of real change. He also brought a letter. Alina opened it with shaking hands while Kaelin watched and Thora played with wooden blocks on the floor. Alina, Iron Ridge is free of the man who wronged us both. The council has voted unanimously to reform our laws. We are creating new governance structures that protect the powerless instead of empowering tyrants. It's slow, difficult work, but it's happening. You don't owe us anything. You made that clear, and I respect it completely. But I thought you should know that your refusal to be silenced started all of this. Your truth broke his power. Your survival gave others hope that change was possible. You changed the world by refusing to die quietly. That's legacy enough for anyone. With deep respect, Cordelia Alina read the letter 3 times, tears sliding down her face. Then she folded it carefully and put it away in the small box where she kept her few precious possessions. That evening, she walked to the edge of the settlement with Thora bundled against her chest. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple and deep blue. Kaelin joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Thinking about going back after all? He asked quietly. No, she said, and meant it. I'm thinking about how far we've come. How much has changed. We have come far. I was thinking, she said slowly, the idea forming as she spoke, about building something here. Not a pack in the traditional sense, but a real community, a place where people who don't fit anywhere else can come. Where strength isn't just about who can fight the hardest or dominate the most, where people have actual choices. Like what Garrett has, but bigger, more intentional? Maybe. I don't know exactly what it would look like. I just know I'm tired of running. I want to build something, plant roots, create something lasting. Kaelin smiled, that rare, beautiful expression that still surprised her every time. Then let's build. Over the following months and years, they did exactly that. Word spread about the settlement in the north, about the former Luna who'd survived the Frostwild and built a community based on mutual aid rather than hierarchy, about the place where outcasts could find safety and purpose. Refugees started arriving, wolves who'd been exiled for challenging unfair authority, humans fleeing abusive situations, anyone who needed a fresh start and was willing to work for it. Alina led them not through dominance, but through example. She worked alongside everyone else, hauling water and chopping wood and hunting when needed. She listened more than she commanded. She made space for people to disagree with her. She created systems where strength meant supporting each other rather than controlling each other. It wasn't easy. There were fights and disagreements and times when she wondered if she was foolish to try. Resources were always scarce. The weather was brutal. But slowly, painfully, something took shape. Something new and fragile and important. Thora grew. At 6 months, she was crawling everywhere, getting into everything. At a year, she was walking and babbling constantly. At 18 months, she spoke her first clear word, Mama. Alina wept hearing it, overwhelmed by the simple perfection of that moment. Kaelin was there for all of it, not as a replacement for Thora's biological father, but as something better. A choice, a partner. A man who loved them both not because fate or bonds compelled him, but because he chose to every single day. On Thora's second birthday, Alina stood at the settlement's edge and looked at what they'd built. 36 cabins now, housing nearly 150 people. Fields cleared and ready for spring planting. A proper school where children learned reading and arithmetic and survival skills. A communal hall twice the size of the original. Smoke rising from chimneys. The sound of laughter and work and life. Not a kingdom. Not a traditional pack with its rigid hierarchies. Something better. Something chosen. Something built on consent and mutual support rather than dominance and fear. "What are you thinking about?" Kaelin asked, joining her with Thora on his shoulders. She was giggling and pulling his hair. "How different things are," Alina said. 3 years ago, I was standing in a great hall being humiliated in front of everyone I knew, believing I had no choice, no power, no future, except what someone else decided for me. And now I know better." She looked at him, at their daughter, at the community spread below them. Power isn't something given by titles or bonds or bloodlines. It's something you take, build, earn through your choices and actions, and it doesn't have to look like a crown or a throne. "No," he agreed, reaching for her hand. "It doesn't." Thora shrieked with laughter as Kaelin spun around, making her dizzy. She grabbed his hair tighter, fearless and joyful. This was power, Alina thought. This laughter, this life, this choice to build something new instead of fighting for scraps of something broken. This community of people who'd all been discarded by someone, somewhere, and had found each other in the cold. This was victory. Not the kind won with claws and teeth and violence, though there had been plenty of that too, but the kind won by refusing to break when everything tried to break you. By surviving when survival seemed impossible. By choosing love and community and hope over bitterness and revenge and the easy comfort of hatred. Alaric had wanted a legacy, an heir to carry his name forward, to prove his worth, to cement his place in history. He'd lost that the moment he chose pride over partnership, power over love, control over trust. But Alina had found something immeasurably better. Not a legacy built on bloodlines and dominance and fear, but one built on survival and strength and the radical act of building a better world from the ruins of the old one. As the sun set over the mountains, painting everything in gold and amber light, Alina held her daughter close and looked at the community she'd helped build from nothing. She'd been called barren, worthless, broken, unfit. But she'd proven them all catastrophically wrong. Not by going back and claiming what had been taken, not by defeating Alaric in single combat or seizing his throne, but by building something new, something better, something entirely her own. And that, she thought, as Thora's laughter rang out across the settlement and Kaelin's hand squeezed hers, was the greatest victory of all. The child Alaric had dismissed as impossible, the woman he'd called worthless and cast aside, the mate he'd betrayed and discarded. They'd survived. They'd thrived. They'd built a future he could never touch or take away. Kaelin took her hand properly, lacing their fingers together, and together they walked back toward the hall where a celebration waited, toward the warmth and the noise and the messy, complicated, beautiful life they'd chosen. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal and indifferent, caring nothing for human struggles or triumphs. But ahead, the future waited, uncertain and difficult, full of challenges they couldn't yet imagine. But it was entirely their own. And for Alina Vane, once Luna of Iron Ridge, now simply Alina, mother, leader, survivor, builder of something new, that was more than enough. It was everything.